Okay. Okay. So I think we are live, Mark. Good morning.
Good morning, Teresa.
It's really nice to meet you here, to meet you in general, and to meet you here. And I really appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today, talking about a topic that is really exciting for us here at Culture Talk, and one that I know that you are truly an expert in. So I'm going to give you in a moment a chance to introduce yourself. But I wanted to just start out by welcoming our guests. So for anyone who is joined us here on LinkedIn or who is watching this later in the day or the week, we welcome you here. This program is called The Business of Culture. And we are coming to you from Culture Talk, which is a platform that helps people to make culture, organizational culture, a tangible tool. And we explore all kinds of topics and talk to really interesting guests and people who are out there in the world doing work that relates to organizational culture. And so this week, I'm excited to have as my guest Mark C. Crowley. And Mark is a award-winning author. He's got a book you may have heard of, probably have encountered, Lead from the Heart, Transformational Leadership for the 21st Century. He's got a podcast by a similar name, Lead from the Heart Podcast, and he's a global speaker. And so I'm excited to introduce Mark and to have him share some of his ideas and the history of where he's come with the books and the ideas that he's brought forward. Mark, you've got 25 years prior to doing all this when you first launched your book in 2011 in the finance industry. So tell us a little bit about that, sort of your journey to get to the learnings and the ideas that you're bringing forward.
So I think that's probably a big question. The progression of my life really started earlier than that. In other words, my upbringing, and I'll just say that there was a lot of loss early on, and I was raised by a father who will just say was the opposite of the supportive, caring kind of person that I'm advocating for. He was sort of ruthless in undermining my sense of well-being and self-esteem and kind of wore me down until the point where he kicked me out of the house when I was
Oh.
18 years old. And this was not an insane person. This was somebody who was thriving in their career and had a very big career and all that, but just had an aspect of him that wasn't designed well for being a parent. So he did a lot of harm to me. And then when he kicked me out of the house, he told me that I would never amount to anything and that I was going to be this abject failure. So I equated unconsciously that there was a binary option here. If I didn't graduate from college, despite the fact that he kicked me out with no money and no support and never went back for a birthday or holiday, that if I didn't, that the implication was that I was the failure he told me I was going to be. So
We internalize so much of that.
right? Oh yeah. I mean, through the course of your life, you realize how that stuff keeps cropping up. But what it did for me was it motivated me by hook or by crook to graduate from college. And so you can imagine no money, no support, a month or two before I was supposed to start college. And here I am trying to figure out how I'm going to survive, moreover, go to college. So I got into college and I started to go. I don't know why they didn't kick me out, but somebody must have seen something in me because I wasn't going to class. I was barely surviving. But I got into a rhythm and I started making some money and I took some student loans out and I got stabilized. And so there was this sort of routine. You get up in the morning, you go to school, you go to work, you go back to school and study and keep this going until they give you a degree. But when I graduated, right at the time that I was graduating, I started asking everybody around me, what are you doing next? Oh, I'm going to Harvard Business School, or I'm going to medical school, or I'm going to this. And I was like, there, but for the grace of God, that like I'm lucky as hell that I graduated from here. I don't deserve any more than that. And then I started thinking, wait a minute, I just graduated from the same top school you just did. And I did well and under really, perverse circumstances. So why is it that You have the optimism. Why do you have the confidence and I have none? And so fast forward, this really gets into the heart of your question. When I started managing people, some trigger went off inside of me that said, you didn't get a lot of stuff that would have made you more optimally performing at this point in your life. Self-confidence, for one, right? Just being able to look around and assess and say, hey, you just graduated from a great university. You did really well. You've overcome all that. I wasn't there yet. But what I decided to do was to give people who work for me, anyone who worked for me, what I always wanted, which was somebody to support me, care for me, advocate for me, make me feel safe, appreciate me, grow me, develop me, all these kinds of things. So I just gave people what I always wanted and saw that people thrived in response to it. So I
Mm.
just kept going. And it wasn't until 20 years later, I'm honest to God with you, that a woman
Doing what you do, right?
I just kept doing it and I kept succeeding and I kept getting promoted and I wasn't looking under the hood to see what was motivating any of this. It was like, why?
I was wondering how conscious your choices
I
were.
wasn't conscious at all. I just did it.
Okay.
You stop doing anything that's not working, but it was working.
Mhm.
So like a flow chart, you just sort of keep going.
Yeah, yeah. We
Bottom
might
line,
call that here, we might call that archetypal. There, there's an
it
underlying.
very well might be, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So a woman who worked for me, Cecilia Godino, came into my office one day and said, you realize you manage people really differently, right? Like there's nobody around here in this financial services dog eat dog world that manages like,
1980s, right?
and that unfolded the whole thing for me, which was I started to
Light
realize
bulb.
like all of this was an influence by my childhood. And so I started digging into it. And then once I fully understood the impact I was having on people, because it was like almost spiritual, the way that people felt about working for me.
Hmm.
And I just kept working on it and trying to practice different ways of refining it. So by the time I'd written my book or by the time I decided to write the book, I was a master at what those things were because they were revealed to me as being really powerful. And then I had to find out why they were, not with the intention of writing a book, but just so that I could become even better at it.
Right. Right. Well, it sounds like at some point it became specific and a conscious choice to get even better at what you had been doing quite naturally, just as a matter of your own motivation to overcome some of your own challenges.
Exactly. Which, by the way, is really powerful when you're intentional and you know what you're doing is going to have the impact that you want it to have, right? I mean, I had so much experience of knowing. So you just, if you get conflict or you get a challenge and it's not working, you don't go, oh, I'm going to have to like jump overboard and figure out something else. You go, no, I've proven this over and over. Just
Right.
keep
I'm going to
going.
dive deeper into the same tactic, the ones that
Correct.
I know are working.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Very interesting. Um, a couple of weeks ago, you had an article in Fast Company. And I know you have a series of articles in Fast Company because I follow them. And when your name props up, I try to really take a look because every time I read one of your articles, I have this real sense of resonance and connection to the message that you have and what the things that you bring forward because they just feel to me like common sense. And so when the last one, I'm going to go back to the article that you wrote was titled Leaders Don't Really Care About Employee Engagement. And it really made us here at Culture Talk sort of stop in our tracks and say, well, of course, we know this, right? So I think what I really connect with about a lot of the things that you write about leadership is a deep sense of connection around that just feels like common sense. It feels like things that why don't most people generally sort of understand this? And I love the beginning of your book when you talk about the resistance. I think maybe in the second edition, you wrote about the resistance that you received when you launched your book. And I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about the state of the scene in 2011 when you first launched your book and how it was received, these ideas that you have about developing people.
So I do want to point something out here that you've used words like resonance, connection, and feels. You didn't say think, right? And those are all heart related things.
That's
I just
right.
find that really interesting. So I think that's why we're connected here, you know? So
Yeah, very much. You'll
we're,
see, I
you're
put
already
my
on the
archetype.
same level that we're at, right? You're
Yeah, not a surprise.
by the way, let me apologize to your audience because I just came down with COVID and I'm kind of like navigating that a little bit here. But you know, you really ask just a great question, which is I'll tell your audience. I'm working with on a new book, and my
Ready.
publisher said to me, you know, really wrote an extraordinary book. And I said, well, thank you. And he goes, if you had titled it anything other than that, it could have been like a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I said, that kind of pissed me off, to be honest with you. And I said, well, you know, like, why are you saying that? And he just said, he goes, isn't it obvious to you that the world wasn't ready for that yet? And I said, yeah, but I wanted to be the one to say it. And because I knew it was truth. And so there's just this resistance. I'll point this out. David Brooks, New York Times columnist, has an article today
Oh,
where he's talking about feelings and emotions and how we underestimate their impact on how we think and act. And he's mentioning people that I had in my book originally and people that I've had on my podcast, cutting edge people showing that everything that I believe is absolutely the truth. But we just are so resistant, not just to this idea of heart. That just sounds soft and weak and sentimental, like a deal killer. Like, oh, Jesus, he's got to be a
that's
nut or
right.
a spiritualist or, you know, right? But the idea that we're not fully rational really annoys a lot of people, particularly in business. Because, you know, I mean, I spent my life in that environment, and you go into these meetings and everything's a PowerPoint and you know everything's an analysis. And what I found through my experience was that by trusting my intuition and my inner knowing, I had a feeling about the way things were going to go that was informed. I didn't really
And
know
it
what I
becomes
was.
like a shortcut. It makes
It
it
was,
quicker.
yeah, I can see this is all very good and it's helpful, but you can't rely on it entirely. And that's what we've been doing. It's like whatever, you know, if you can't prove it, like, and you mentioned something in your LinkedIn post today. The reason that I have so much data and had to go out and, you know, basically validate this over and over and over is because people wouldn't take me seriously. They don't take it seriously anyway. I mean, a lot of people just look at this and just think, heart smart, you know, I mean, they just instantly dismiss it. But what's emerging now is this massive amount of science that shows we've always had it wrong, that feelings and emotions drive behavior, and positive emotions are far more effective at supporting people's optimal performance. So why wouldn't we want to then reassess how we lead? If that's the case, if people thrive under positive emotions, wouldn't we want to go out of our way to give them more of them and find ways to give them that experience, knowing that it's going to support them performing better? But it's
Right.
just this idea that nope, you know, we hire the smartest people. You know, if you didn't go to Wharton, you don't deserve to be in the C-suite. It's all that kind of stuff, you know. And so I, if to be honest with you, if I'm working with a different publisher and he said, if he had said what he said to me when I wrote the second edition, I still would have stuck with the title because it's truth. You know what I mean? But I have paid a price for it. There's no question. There's a
Yeah.
lot of people that just think this is nonsense.
Yeah. And I can really relate to that as well, because when we launched Culture Talk, and saw the this common sense connection around how it feels to be in an environment, the water that you're swimming in, the environment that you create through your actions and the way that you treat people will be the driver of your business success. And we got a lot of that similar feedback. In fact, even this spring, with advisors still pushing and asking, make sure you have proof, bring the research, bring the proof to show organizations why these things really impact the bottom line. And here's a funny story you might appreciate. A couple months ago, we had somebody we were talking to from Australia who kind of rolled his eyes and said, oh, you Americans, all the American companies I work with are always asking me for proof. And you don't get that kind of request nearly as much outside of the US. So we thought that was kind of an interesting
That's encouraging.
aside, yeah, to learn that it's a particularly strongly held need, or it's probably not a real need, but perceived need in the US to have proof that this soft stuff is going to actually move the needle for the business case as well.
I mean, I've had great exposure to some really brilliant people through my podcast. And one of the things that I've learned, not really learned so much as just had validated over and over, is that these supremely bright people are using heart and mind all the time. In fact, I think his name is David Rosenstein, who's billionaire hedge fund guy, just bought the Baltimore Orioles. He has a show on Bloomberg, and he's interviewed some of the greatest business, most successful business leaders of all time. Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos as examples.
Mhm.
And so we were talking about intuition, and he goes, let's just put it this way. He goes, if you were to go to Amazon and say, what's this company about? They would say it's about data. They have data on everything. And like even to the extent of like what's the color that we use on this ad? They'll do an A/B test to see if blue or dark blue works better. It's that kind of. But at the end of the day, Jeff Bezos is the most intuitive leader I've ever seen in my life. Like he'll go on feel 100% of the time, even when he has the data, he'll make a call. He goes, Apple computer never would have been created had Steve Jobs just been this guy. It was all on intuition about how to make people feel. And you look at the design of all their products. So it's very interesting that what distinguishes these kinds of people is that they're already there. How they got there, I don't know. But the resistance is just the mind telling us, I don't want to give up control. I'm pretty convinced that it's our minds that are telling us, don't let the heart in. It's going to steer you wrong. I'll take care of you. I'll give you the right decisions. But when you think about the
And
world,
you might look silly, like you mentioned earlier, or make yourself vulnerable in a way that is a little less comfortable, until it's not, until that's the accepted way of behaving within an organization. The ability to be vulnerable and still stay safe and be seen and still be able to move forward and meet
yeah,
goals.
I mean, it's interesting because I mean, I can't say, every generation says, oh, it was so much easier before or whatever. But what I'll say is that we're living in a time where, I mean, look at the volatility in this world. Like we don't know what's coming the next day. There's so much uncertainty. And if you think in your mind, literally, that you can control outcomes, you are setting yourself up for some major, major disappointments. If you're not operating from a point of view that says, I need to be, like I need to be the balance guy, I need to be able to respond to whatever comes my way versus expecting that because I've planned it all out, that it's going to go the way I want it to. And I have seen so many people in my career go, well, I don't
What
know
just
what the hell
happened?
happened here. Like, I mean, I thought this through. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Like you went into this thing with a sense that you could control outcomes, and that's just a complete illusion. Like we're not in control of anything. You can plan, and trains do run on time. There's no question, but trains go off the tracks. People. I mean, there's life just is not controllable. So if you have the versatility of being able to go, okay, what do I feel in this moment, and operate on that, you're going to be guided in a way that our minds just simply can't do. And that's not to say that you don't use your mind. It's just it's a combination, and we're only using one aspect of it.
Right. And it's interesting. I'm curious what you think about the our organizations beginning to reward both aspects of it. So I think a lot of times when people take that point of view, it may be because they see a trajectory and they have to stay sort of on track in order to reach a certain, corporate ladder, or the ability to reach their financial goals means that they have to stick to that, really cerebral based approach to things. Are you starting to see organizations that reward the soft skills more even now that there's a growing body of evidence that leading from that space actually generates results in organizations.
I don't think it's going to be this gradual thing, where we're just tipping up and all of a sudden, slowly but surely, there's going to be this tipping point. And I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet.
Me
But
too.
where, you know what I mean? Going back to what you said earlier about some of this being obvious. I mean, the amount of research that I've done is so mind-blowing that that's not obvious. It's like, oh, but the premise of what I'm talking about is really obvious, right? So,
Right. Well, and I mean, one thing I would say to anyone listening is if you're looking for some of that research, go get Mark's book because the appendix has links to all of the research that he's referencing. And so if you find that helpful or necessary in your line of work, and just because it's a fantastic book, but at the end is a tremendous resource with all the research.
thank you. Thank you. Microsoft is a really good example. When Steve Ballmer was the CEO, he created stack ranking in the most merciless. He thought it was going to set people up for success, and he created a stack ranking system that basically meant that two or three of the top, like say you had 10 people on your team, two or three of them would get bonuses, stock options, opportunities for promotions. The rest of them were like lucky as
I can
hell.
already feel that in the pit of my
Right?
stomach.
Yes. And then the bottom 10% or 15% get lopped off. And like, so if you had a team of 10, they had to fit those boxes. So if somebody was like your team is just killing it. I mean, everybody's doing great, but the stack ranking made you put people on the bottom and get them fired. Horrible system.
I've heard about that from people who worked underneath it.
Did you? I mean,
Yeah.
so it lost a lot of people and it brought out the worst behavior in people. People were sabotaging each other's work, or they go, oh, I heard Teresa's doing great work. Oh, well, I've been in some meetings with her and she really hasn't been prepared and, like that kind of stuff. But what they did when Satya Nadella came in was they not only eliminated that, but what they did was they overrode it with a new bonus plan that says we're going to evaluate how cooperative and collaborative you are. So in order to get a good review,
Exactly the opposite.
everyone around you has to say he's really helpful. I mean, I love that, right? Because now we're not meant to compete with each other. That's stupid. Like, and especially in business. I mean, in a sales
Well, it's a
organization,
scarcity mindset, right?
it
So
is
the first thing set up
completely
real scarcity and then forced everyone to live to it. And the second one opened it up and said the pie is as big as we can all make it and
correct.
invite you to live into that. And what a difference that makes.
The thing that I love about it is that they're rewarding the very behavior that I happen to believe, and they clearly understand drives the greatest performance. Because when you and I are on the same team and I'm looking out for you and you're looking out for me, like you're not going to have as many bad days because I'll pep you up.
Got your back. Yeah.
I got your back
Hmm.
and you
Yeah.
have mine, right?
Right.
And we have each
Right.
other's and we're rewarded for it. But I think what happens is that even though we're rewarded for it, it becomes sort of natural because the
It
the
makes you feel
program
good.
attracts the kind of people that want to live like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it creates the culture and the environment that when people look around and they see this is the behavior that gets rewarded. And oh, and by the way, it makes you feel good too. And it
Right.
creates, a better tomorrow. And, incrementally, we're moving the needle in a direction that creates engagement, without having to, we can go through all the metrics of measuring everything, but there's a common sense, at least to me, common sense to you probably as well. Understanding that if you make people feel good, if you are looking out for their best interests, if you are developing them, then quite naturally they will feel engaged. But for the
There are a
right
lot
reason.
of people that absolutely disagree with that. So the premise is that I'm interested in your well-being. I'm interested in how you feel. That that if I demonstrate that kind of interest in you and try to support you that way, that you're going to get soft around the middle and start to take advantage of me. So the way to offset that is that I have to keep you under my thumb at all times. So rattle your cage every once in a while, give you a deadline, and then I need it earlier now, and you're gonna have to stay today to get it done. I have kids events that I've got to get to. I don't care, just get it. That kind of demonstrating you don't care about my well-being. We actually think that that's going to get better performance out of you. It's crazy, non-intuitive, but
Non-intuitive, yeah. I wonder, when you think about the origins of that, like where do you see, where did that come from? I mean, I know I entered the workforce in the 80s and, had definitely a lot of the same experiences you talk about, about not bringing yourself to the office, not being, maybe focused on family events or things, there's that clear separation of who you are at work, and then really don't bring into it anyone that you are at home. I'm curious about sort of
it
from
goes it
whence
goes
that
back to
came,
the
and
it literally came at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution because when, the people were farmers basically until the Industrial Revolution, and then they moved out of rural areas into cities and started working in factories. And it was really hard work. And the fundamental belief was that people don't want to work. They don't want to do this specific work. And a lot of that work was really hard. So what they did was they said, look, I'm paying you this, and if you do a good job, you might get a little bit more and sort of some kind of a bonus. But if you don't do good, I'm going to fire you because there's somebody waiting outside who's going to take your job. So right out of the gate, it's fear and intimidation. But it was also micromanagement and punishment for people who didn't keep up. All of that's traditional leadership theory. Pay people as little as possible, squeeze as much out of them as possible, and get rid of the people who aren't performing. So you start off that way. I mean, who's going to look forward to going to work? And we've carried that over into the
are you
21st.
engaged?
What?
And then are you engaged?
Yeah, I know, right? How happy are you in this work? So people were just working for money at that time. That's all they were thinking about was meeting their basic needs. It's only been really in the last 25 years that people have been thinking about, I want to be fulfilled by my work. I want to, I want meaning, I want to grow and I want to be optimized. We weren't there because up until really the last 25, 30 years, most people couldn't afford to. They needed a job just to live. But
Right,
once we've gotten to a point now where most people can meet their basic needs, it's Maslow. And Maslow said, no
right.
need, no, we don't progress to the next need until we meet the first one. So it took us a long time to get everybody to a point where they were not, certainly not everybody, but the majority of the population, particularly in the United States, where people had enough money coming in every month that they didn't fear they were going to lose their home or not be able to eat, that all of a sudden they started going, you know what? I need a job that's going to make me happy. So people didn't have that luxury, and that allowed us to continue this horrible way we've been managing people for over, 200 years.
Right, right. And now we have these new generations in the workforce who thankfully have never worked in those types of circumstances. And so they're asking for more. And I really believe that the way that you talk about developing people in your book, is the way that they're going to start to feel that sense of connection and meaning, and the ability to grow within the company, and really make a strong contribution. So you outlined four basic steps. I don't know if you would call them steps, or four basic things. And then I think you added a fifth one in the second edition, but maybe just tick them off for us. What are those approaches to leadership that you outlined in your first book?
They're hard to kind of tick off because there's meaning underneath them.
Oh yeah,
Maybe
you do speak my language.
is there one that like appealed to you that maybe we could dig
So
in?
yeah, I think the one maximizing human potential, I think is, to me, if the juice, you can, the other are the others are a lead into that, but to me that's where the juice really lies.
So I didn't anticipate you asking that one, but I'm really thrilled you did because what's interesting is the book that I'm going to be reading this weekend in preparation for my next podcast guest is a book called 10 to 25. And so this is the end of Gen Z, but really it's the what I'm interested in is the end of it, the 20 to 25. But what he's shown is that what if you want to motivate that generation, starting as 10-year-old kids today, so somebody born in 2014,
So teachers listen up, right?
yes, that the way to do it is to mentor them. And this has been something that's been progressing because when I looked at millennials when they first came out, what they wanted was a coach. They didn't want to work for a manager. Now, this new Gen Z and whatever the new generation is going to be called before it, they're coming into the world and they're saying, I want to learn. And what we've understood for a really long time is that, and I'm leaning against engagement, but it's still, it's
It's
still
still
legitimate,
there. Yeah.
right? That when people are growing, they're happiest. And so if you ever had a conversation with somebody, I got to do something different. I'm tired of doing this all the time. Well, if you're saying to somebody, that's not to say that you need to learn something more about what you're doing. Give somebody an opportunity to learn something about, hey, you want to buy a house? I'll send you a class about mortgages or learn about retirement. Give people opportunities to broaden themselves in ways that they hadn't. Pick a book. This is something that I used to do with my teams all the time. We picked the book, we read the book, we discussed the book. I used to line them up against the row.
I
Remember
love that story. Yes.
right?
Yeah. Like a
And ask
spelling
them
bee.
questions like a spelling
Uh-huh.
bee. And if
Yeah.
they didn't know the answer, they would sit down and it was just this fantastic way. But I could see, and you'll recall this, that their behavior changed. They felt better about themselves because they were growing. And so what I'm saying is that it's not just about paying benefits. If you're going to work for somebody, you want to know that person's going to take their expertise and give it to you. And the reason that most managers don't, you want to guess? Why
Oh,
wouldn't
the reason they don't
give them, teach
no,
people
the
what
reason
they
most
know?
people don't feel engaged, yeah, well, goes back to the manager relationship most of the time, right? So the personal investment that you're willing to make in me opens up
Why
my
don't they?
awareness.
Why wouldn't a manager automatically take all their expertise that they've acquired and worked hard for and give it to you as their employee? Why
Oh,
wouldn't they?
fear that you will pass me by, or
Correct. Correct. You're going to take my job. But the other is like, well, I worked really hard for it, so why should I give it to you? And I'm like, okay, goes back to what you said earlier. That's a scarcity mentality. My
right,
job is to elevate you. And if I elevate you and I elevate everybody who's working here, they're going to see I'm really good at this. And I have no fear about being, passed over because somebody that I've tutored is now better than me. Like
right.
but that is the mindset. We're
Right.
always,
And I think that goes to something much harder to change, and not impossible. And definitely, I'm a huge proponent of changing it, but structural. So within the structure of the organization, making that not true. Um,
100%. You read my
and
mind. I mean, it's the culture. So if people are
yes,
always fearing, right? If they're always looking around, then you've fostered an environment like Steve Ballmer did, where people are like, I'm not teaching her anything. She can figure it out on her own.
right. Well, I liken it to professional services, especially you have attorneys or doctors who are coming up, and that mentality of, well, I had to go through it the hard way, so we're going to make you go through, these ridiculous hours and put in your time. And it's like, well, to what end, right? The exhaustion, the burnout, the attrition from, especially from, in attorneys that leave the field because of that mentality of, well, I'm going to make you earn it. I'm going to make you have, go through the same paces that I had to go through to get to where I am in my career. So it takes a whole structural shift for industries and organizations to start deciding that we're going to lean into practices that actually support the well-being of human beings instead of, just continuing, this is the way we've done things.
I mean, it's amazing, right? That medical industry continues to do this, right? I
Hmm.
mean, continues to make people work these ridiculous hours. Just just this week, a junior banker, somebody with like a superior pedigree, great resume, really smart, hardworking guy. They were working him like 100 hours a week and telling him, he's leaving at 2 in the morning, and the boss would say, no, you got to finish this. And he died. Like,
I was gonna say, yeah.
24 years, 25-year-old guy that just died on the job because of exhaustion. And Bank of
I did
America
not see
saying,
that.
if your boss is making you work like that, you need to let us know. And I'm like, no, you need to tell your managers they can't ask people to do it. It's
Right.
a, it's not tell us if we're doing bad. It's tell people not to do bad.
Right. Set up a culture and a system that catches that right. So that's the anomaly. So that person, that manager stands out as the one who's not living into the values of the organization. So Mark, is it too early to ask you about your second book, or is that something that you'd love to share?
I'm gonna keep it a little bit of a secret.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair
I,
enough.
I would love to share with you, but I will say that the world changed. Here I am experiencing COVID for the first time, but when COVID hit, it changed people fundamentally, and it's influencing expectations of work that we've never seen before, kind of some of what we've talked about. And
Hmm.
so what I've been able to do is to really put together sort of a guide to how you need to be thinking and how you need to be managing in this post-COVID environment. So I'll give you that nugget.
Okay. All right. Excellent. We're seeing similar things in the culture work that we do and with the practitioners who are trained in the culture talk system. A lot of the topics that are coming back are related to that, to the new way that people want to work, and a lot around remote work and hybrid work and the changes that that's created in our environments, and how do you navigate that? So I'll be keeping my eye on it for
That's
sure.
interesting. Eric Schmidt just yesterday came out and it's basically attacked the president CEO um, for allowing people to work from home. He doesn't think that it's compatible with, high achievement and the startup mentality. So I happen to believe, I know this is going to be not what you're expecting, but I think in time, more companies are going to do less of it and not more of it. I think we're at sort of an equilibrium right now where any company that's allowing you to work in a hybrid, sort of a 3-2-2-3 balance. I, I'm I just have this feeling that if we get into a recession, which almost seems
They're
inevitable,
going to tighten the reins. Yeah.
yeah, they're going to use that as an excuse, all hands on deck,
Yeah.
so it'll be, lucky to work Friday at home kind of a thing. It'll piss people off, pardon me, but they'll have the leverage to do it and they've always wanted to. A lot of companies never really bought into it. So I don't think we have, based on my own work, why are they so enlightened on hybrid but not on managing people? I think it's because people just demanded it. It was like, I'm not coming back. I'm
That's
not
right.
coming, right? So they kind of acquiesced and let it go on too long. And so now they're stuck with it. But I don't think they like it. And so I'm going to be surprised if, whenever the next recession comes, a year from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now,
Yeah.
if
And the market tightens down again. Yeah.
you can't get any job, you're not going anywhere, so we're bringing you back. That's my bet.
Yeah. Will be very interesting to see. And in the meantime, one of the questions that we're always most interested in is what kind of environment are you creating with those human beings, whether they're home or in the office? And how do you make the most of whatever setup that you do have? And we've seen organizations that thrive with the remote, and we've seen ones who are really struggling with it, to your point. And leaders who are struggling for some of the reasons that we're talking about today, because of their desire to create real connection, because of their own, knowledge that actually is, what helps their organization to thrive. So I think there's a lot in every corner of the conversation. It's definitely not a one-sided, um, you know, thing. And I think that you're 100% right. We will see it continue to shift and evolve, maybe a little bit depending on what happens with, the market itself.
I just read something the other day that showed that like a quarter of managers have ever been trained on how to manage people remotely. So
That's very true. Yeah,
that's also a sign to me that companies didn't think this was going to keep going,
right. They weren't really
right?
invested in it, right?
Why
Which
teach them
with
something
all
they're not going to need, you know?
Yeah. With all of this stuff, the investment, to change is really what makes a difference. And the decision to do it well, no matter what the work situation is what really makes a difference. So it's the place of coming from the heart to begin
Yeah.
with and deciding that you're going to, work with the human beings and create that sense of connection, that I think really drives a difference. So I'll be keeping my eye on your
No,
new
we'll
work.
see whether I'm right. I mean, it's just my speculation.
Yeah.
And Nick Bloom at Stanford is, everything that he writes, he's the expert on remote work, and he just thinks this is definitely the future and the better technology, the more likely. But I will say this, and I wrote this article for Fast Company when workers were starting to be asked to come back, after the worst of COVID was over and we're opening up offices again. And I go, this is not sustainable for most people. Like if you're a coder and you don't have any interaction with people all day anyway, you're in a dark room, just, X's and O's, or zeros and ones rather. A lot of those people don't need to be in an office together, be around people because there's not a lot of collaboration. But if you're on a team and you don't get together regularly,
Yeah.
I believe that it's the being together that allows the remote working, and you exhaust the system if you don't get people together. Some people disagree with me, but what I said in the article was that no high performing team is going to be high performing if they're not meeting regularly and get to know each other intimately. Like, and
Well, I mean, I think this goes to this goes to cows. I love the part in the book where you bring the research forward about cows and how when a farmer, I'm going to simplify it down, right? When a farmer names their cows, the cow can feel the energetic difference that it makes um, to be called by name and the connection that creates. And that's a, in-person connection, if you will. So the cow can feel that energy. I also believe that human beings gain a lot from the connection that happens in person, and that the energetic connection from human to human does make stronger communication. Obviously, so much research around the nonverbal communication that we have, the 3D-ness of being with somebody in the same room, and so many things that happen because you're together. But maybe you can speak more about the cows, but it was definitely.
you just did a brilliant summary, to be honest with you. That was really great. And it really is. It's so, one of my main theses is that we're not rational. It's how we feel that influences our behavior more than anything. And cows are sentient beings. And so the evidence is clear that it's the same for them. If you call them by name versus giving them a tag with a number, you're demonstrating that you care about them. You demonstrate that you love them. Hi, Nellie, right?
You
That, that,
changed,
that's
right?
very different,
Yeah.
right? Nellie
Yeah.
feels that and produces 8% more milk,
Right. The milk, right. They
right?
produce more milk, right?
And so it's an energy. It's like, do I feel like this person cares about me? Does this human being that's about to milk me and want something from me really care about me, or am I just a number? Like I don't know how to explain that except that there's a feeling that's going on. The cow isn't rationalizing, Farmer Mark doesn't care about me because he tagged me. He's feeling that I'm Nelly, and that's a good thing. That feels good to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so humans are no different. I mean, it's just simply no different. Ask people why you quit the job. I didn't feel appreciated. I didn't feel respected. I didn't feel I didn't think respected. I didn't think, appreciated. It's all about feelings all the time, whether we
Hmm.
want it or not. So if we take a lesson from the farmers. Excuse me, the farmers that were willingly calling them by name. If we just do a little more to make people feel positive, have a real um, sense of being cared for, just start there. I mean, the impact is profound on people. The minute people feel like I'm working for somebody who cares about me, the whole world changes for them.
The whole thing changes. Yeah.
Then they want to reciprocate. They want to give back. It's like anybody that gives to me the way you're giving, I want to give back to you out of appreciation. It's instinctual. It's
Right.
human
Right.
nature.
And that goes, I mean, full circle back to the article we stumbled upon about engagement. If you want to create engagement, you need to start caring about how your people feel. And you referenced in that article well-being. But I think that the perception that you care about me, that you know me, that I'm more than just, XYZ employee, but I have a name, a family, a history, a story, and a future, and that you care about all of those things. I think, really
Very well
sums it
said.
up. Yeah.
Very well said. I mean, that
Yeah.
it's really what it comes down to. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's simple. I have the article in front of me, and the thing that cracked me up was how simple this guy's methodology was. I hope I have this in this article. Maybe I don't have it in the notes. This, overall, how happy do you feel this week? Can you see that?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah. The emojis. Yes.
it's like we don't need a million metrics. Tell us about how you feel about this. What do you think about this? And what do you think about this? It's like, just pick a color. Tell
That's
me where
right.
you are. That's
And the numbers of people who opted in to participate, right? And say,
astonishing, right? But I mean, it's like
unbelievable.
this correlates directly to performance. How are people being made to feel? I mean, this is the most compelling reinforcement for my work there's ever been. And
Right. Well, and one of the reasons we thought culture would be such a compelling topic, because it just, again, makes, how do you feel? Well, how does it feel to be here, on a given day?
the problem is that there's with engagement and with culture, there's zero accountability. So if it's not on your scorecard, it's not on your metrics, you're not being rewarded for it, you're not going to do it. I used to
Right.
run sales for one of the banks that I worked for, and I used to create all the incentive and recognition programs. And the main takeaway for me, and it was great because it was very early in my career, and what I learned was that what you pay for, you get a lot more than you could ever imagine. And what you don't pay for, you get nothing. And so you just assume, well, they'll just keep doing that because they're already doing it. And it's like, nope, you're not paying me to do it. I'm not going to do it. So both culture and engagement are really hard to pin down at the level of the manager. So you can't say, well, you don't have a very good culture on your team. How do you measure that? How do
Yeah.
you say, well, you don't have good engagement at your team when you're only measuring it once or twice a year? With this, you're measuring it, bi-weekly or weekly, and you start to stack them up to other managers, and you're like, hey, your team is
Right.
does not have very healthy well-being. What are you doing about it? And now I'm seeing the results from other people, from other my peers, and they're getting the
Look
sales
at their
results,
smileys.
right? Yeah. And I'm like, my guys are all angry and red. So at some point you say, well, you're not going to get a bonus or you're not going to get a promotion. You're not going to keep your job if you don't fix this.
Yeah.
That's why I love well-being more than anything else, is because the minute you make somebody on Twitter yesterday was asking me this question, is like, he wants to cajole men into buying into this whole thesis. He said, we don't need to cajole them. We just need to tell them this is the expectation. Do this as your part of your job and hold them accountable. I don't care if they have resistance or think it's soft or whatever. It's like, if this is what we think will drive better performance, this is the job of managers. We change managers' roles all the time. We want you to do more of this. We want you to start coaching, or we want you to be whatever. So if you just say, well-being is important, you figure it out because it's going to be now your scorecard.
And we're going to find a way to hold you accountable.
Exactly.
The interestingly, been following the work of Eric Ries, who he wrote The Lean Startup, probably around the time when you launched your first book. and recently launched a new stock exchange called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, focused on the idea that if we are holding organizations accountable for more than their quarterly results, then we will start seeing longer term thinking. And a huge part of that, speaks to the heart of what we're talking about, which is this is a long-term play. This is not like we're going to encourage and support and mentor people and then turn around and expect that the quarterly results are going to go up. But that's a play that you mentioned was 25 years in the making of a way of being with your staff that drove results consistently, repeatedly over the long haul. But you don't do it for the quick gain. And that's what most people are held accountable for. And I think that's what you were alluding to in your article as well, is that, CEOs don't care about engagement scores because they are more focused on what are the numbers going to read when we have to report our quarterly earnings, and what is the bump that our stock is going to get and the incentives that I might gain by paying attention to that.
Eric Ries wasn't the first person to say this. This has been argued for quite some time. The problem is that it used to be, and I haven't read his book, and he probably makes these points, that it once was that it was you buy and hold stocks.
Right.
You hold, right?
For the long
You
term,
hold
right?
them for the long term.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't know what it is, but the average stock is owned for like minutes,
Minutes, right? Exactly.
right? People are buying them and selling them, and they're arbitraging them on the daily. We think it's going to go up today, so you buy it. So quarterly earnings are really important in driving that behavior. The problem is you're never going to have a healthy organization if you're living
Exactly.
quarter to quarter. Because
Exactly.
the minute you report a quarterly number, and people are like, "Oh man, we did it!"
The next one
You're like,
starts.
"Hell no, man! We got to get back on the horse. We got to
Uh-huh.
go."
Yeah,
It's really bad
exactly.
news. Yeah.
Exactly. Awesome. So listen, I so appreciate your time here and this conversation, and I could talk to you all day. And I especially appreciate you showing up, even though you're not feeling your best. So thank you for being here, even though you're not feeling well. And I'd love to stay connected. And as I said, I will continue to follow your podcast and watch for your work as it comes out. Where can people find you? You also speak. You also have a course I saw that you released. Tell us a little bit more about what you're up to, where people can find you, how they can support you.
So all roads lead to Rome, markccrowley.com. I have a C in the middle. And it was because there was another Mark Crowley when the book came out, so I added the C. markccrowley.com is where you can find information on the book, on the podcast, all of my articles. So everything and speaking information, that kind of stuff. So that's probably the best place. But I'm also on LinkedIn. So link in with me, and I'm on Twitter. Huge presence on Twitter and post there every single day, multiple times. So any way people want to connect, I hope they will. And then you can find the podcast on the website as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Again, really appreciate your time, your wisdom, and your energy. And I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you. Lovely meeting you. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Truth.